Oh, yes, baby. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm a little late to the party here, but Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever followed my channel, you know that I love Resident Evil. I've played Resident Evil 7. Hell, my Resident Evil 8 playthrough, I didn't even decide to cut it into parts. You know when I make a Let's Play and I'm doing part 1, part 2, you're never going to get it done, okay? At some point, I'm going to get tired of it. But ladies and gentlemen, if I can just record the entire game in one shot and upload it, I'm happy. And honestly, I usually play Resident Evil games like that too. They're like one-sitting games for me. I know that sounds crazy to some people, but for me, Resident Evil is a franchise that I love, okay? I love this level of survival horror. I love puzzles. I love figuring out, hey, Muda, you got 30 rounds in your handgun. Are you going to make it to the next save point? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that kind of tension, that kind of wildness gets me going. And now, I loved Resident Evil 1 Remake. I loved Resident Evil 2 Remake. Resident Evil 3 Remake's alright. It's fine. Hey, did the job. Now we've got Resident Evil 4 Remake. Woo! Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is from the PlayStation State of Play 2022. Now, there are a couple other games revealed here. I really don't care for much of them. I'm usually a Resident Evil kind of guy. So when I saw this, you bet that I nutted. Now, of course, it takes me a while to get here, but I wanted to make this video not just about looking at this trailer, but really going over the fact that Resident Evil 4 is in fact a masterpiece, one of my favorite games ever made, and one that has kept me hopelessly addicted for years on end. It's actually a game that I replay every year, and when I start it, I keep it running till the credits scream. Here it is, 3/24. Oh, next year, March, man. I can't wait for this, dude. It's gonna fly by real fast. And it's just before tax season, so I'm not going to be like super duper sad. Look at that, captured on PS5, mix of gameplay and in-game cinematic. So hopefully that means that it's not, you know, like bullshots or anything, like they're not faking CG footage, which I don't expect from them. Usually everything Capcom has ever shown for Resident Evil has pretty much been in-engine anyways. And I mean, the games look good, so I'm not calling sussy wussy. This ain't Cyberpunk 2077. Now, of course, this segment right over here just before this, like if we just go right back, you'll notice that they actually have like these new little like story segments where like the president's going up to our boy Leon over here, who looks a little different, I'll say, but the president's coming up to give Leon the job. I never saw this in the original game, so I'm glad that they're adding shit to flesh out the story. If it's something I loved about Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake, is that they added the game, they added a lot of plot stuff to just make a more cohesive storyline, you know, versus what they originally had on the PlayStation 1, which is obviously due to a lack of development budgets, time, and honestly the technology at the time. So I'm glad they're fleshing out the story a little bit more. This is Ashley running away, okay? They might actually have some extra gameplay for her finally. I remember in the original game, you got to play her just a little bit here and there, typically in the castle. You got Ada Wong, so hopefully, now that we've seen Ada, maybe they'll keep separate ways. One of the things I didn't like about Resi 3 Remake was that they took out like they took out a fair bit from the original PS1 title. Like it was one game where like Mercenaries wasn't even a section of it. So hopefully this means this is the full package. We get Assignment Ada, separate ways, the, you know, base campaign obviously, and the full Mercenaries mode. So hopefully all of it stays intact. So here we got Leon walking. This is definitely gameplay. They got some hair physics and the village, baby. Okay, all right, that looks pretty. Okay, the village itself looks pretty much what I expected, okay? Yeah, look at that. That's the exact village. That's the fence you hop over. You run into the building behind this tower, and the chainsaw guy spawns. You get the shotgun in that building. So yes, this is a full-on remake of every location, actually pretty faithfully. And it's something that I love about the graphics for Resident Evil is that every time I look at the visuals, I'm gonna give a hot take here. Like, I'm sure people will disagree, but I think when a Resident Evil game drops, it's actually like visually the best of its, you know, release year. Like, I remember when Resident Evil 4 was out on the GameCube. I played it on the PlayStation 2. I remember were that I was actually blown away at the visuals. I thought the character, graphics looked, I thought the, character models looked great. I thought the environments looked superb. And honestly, the atmosphere itself was pretty rock on for that. So I'll be here to say it. I thought the original game looks good, and I think it still holds up. And there's mods for the PC that make it look even better. And this remake is pretty much what I expected from an updated 2023 version of Resident Evil 4. Oh, you got the Red 9, baby, the Red 9! Okay. Yeah, no, this looks really, really solid for sure. That's a glimpse of the castle section. And, yeah. Oh, he's referencing Resident Evil 2. Don't worry, dude, the pain never fades away, buddy. And of course, they added extra cutscenes to this that really just add to the overall, like, story beats for the game. And I absolutely appreciate that. Another shot over here, you can see that this is full-on real-time gameplay of, like, the character literally walking through this actual area. So I actually really appreciate this, like, little teaser that we've got. Now, of course, this is a 2-minute reveal trailer, and there's not much to really gather off of this, right? But the reason I wanted to make this video is that, there's been a fair bit of, like, discourse about the Resident Evil 4 remake. Like, some people are saying this is a little too creepy than I last remembered. Now, I just want to stop the whole thing right there. Resident Evil games have always been campy experiences, some more than others. Now, Resident Evil 4 is the prime description of campiness in the video game. I mean, this is the same game, okay, where you can find banger lines like this.
I have been honored with the prodigious power from the great Lord Sadler. I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro. Where's everyone going? Bingo? Sadler, why don't you give up and let Ashley go home?
Perhaps you are disillusioned with overconfidence, just because you killed my small-time subordinate.
Sadler, you're small time.
Are you out of your mind?
I knew you'd be fine if you landed on your butt.
I really need you to fuck my sister.
I mean, there's literally elements of Resident Evil 4 where Leon goddamn matrixes his way up a fucking wall to avoid lasers. If that scene isn't remade, this is not going to be a faithful remake of the original title. And obviously, I don't doubt that there's going to be campiness in this. Both Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8 had campy bits. I mean, Resident Evil 8 literally acknowledged the Chris Redfield boulder punching meme. So if a game that good can acknowledge campy stuff like that and still not break the illusion, I think it's fine. The Resident Evil team, Capcom does not do a bad job regarding that. Now, of course, when I look at Resident Evil 4, immediately I can kind of just tell you that Resident Evil Village, which we played last year, basically felt like Capcom trying to like do a beta version of the Resident Evil 4 remake. I'm not saying Village isn't its own great independent game, but obviously a lot of systems that you saw in Village, which were inspired by Resident Evil 4, such as the shop system, the fact that, the game pretty much incentivized you to get into actual combat encounters with the various enemies so you can earn money that you can use to upgrade your firearms, get more supplies. Obviously, it was sort of a, pre-check to like Resident Evil 4 Remake. So when I look at Resident Evil 4 Remake, it's an interesting remake because when you have Resi 2 and Resi 3, PlayStation 1 games that had more of a focus on puzzle solving, survival horror, the level design was more geared for that, the remakes tended to play really well. They basically took the updated control scheme of Resident Evil 6 and then basically implemented that into a very, very proper puzzle-oriented game where there was a lot of backtracking, a lot of puzzle solving. To this day, Resident Evil 2 Remake is, in my opinion, the best Resident Evil game ever made. I know some people will disagree and say Resident Evil 1 Remake is great, and you're absolutely right, it's a great game. I think 2 is where like the team really perfected it. I mean, that game was in development for a long time. There was a lot of hype for it, and the fact that Capcom met the hype is an absolute amazing feat to do. It's not easy to meet hype that high, especially for a franchise as stoic as Resident Evil. Now, of course, Resi 4 Remake is where things kind of all changed. Back in the day, Resident Evil 4 Remake Resident Evil 4 itself, the original, was not too shy on turning itself into an action shooter. This was a different time for Capcom, and Capcom really took a bet turning this franchise into a basic third-person shooter. Resident Evil 4 was the first Resident Evil game, as far as my understanding went, from from the mainline series, where instead of like the earlier games where, let's say you have one pistol, you're really making sure that you use the rounds you have to the most optimal effect. Resident Evil 4 was the one game where they basically like told you, hey, there's 100 zombies on the screen, make sure you kill all of them because they're going to be dropping tons of loot that you can use in order to progress through the game. It basically incentivized you to get into combat, and it was really great. To this day, Resident Evil 4 is not just a masterpiece, but it's sort of like a master class in immersiveness, in my opinion. You know, people complain about things like the QuickTime events, but I thought they were done so well in the original Resident Evil 4. I thought the ability for the game to just spam you with a QuickTime event to quickly dodge, you know, incoming projectiles or whatnot, or like specialized bosses, was super duper cool. I thought the idea of like, instead of giving you like a crosshair, like in the newer games, even in the newer remakes, the ability for you to paint a laser onto the enemy and fire right at their head was, in my opinion, a very simple yet effective touch at giving the most immersive experience possible. It was a game where the only HUD elements really were just your ammo counter in the bottom right. Other than that, you had to experience the visual style of the entire world. It was, at the time, one of the best and most polarizing Resident Evil games ever. The visual style was top-notch, but obviously, because of how successful Resident Evil 4 was, Resident Evil 5 and 6 became sort of the black sheeps of the franchise. Now, I like 5. I played the fuck ton out of 5, but I will gladly admit Resident Evil 6 was, in fact, just an action B-movie, and they basically became giant co-op shooters. Now, honestly, looking at Resident Evil 4 Remake, I'd be very shocked if Capcom would remake 5 or 6. I don't think they're ever able to do that, simply because those games, if you thought 4 was an action shooter, those games are just like off-brand Gears of War at this point, okay? Like, we're not even joking how close to shooter territory that stuff is. In fact, it's not close to, it very much resides in the shooter camp. Those are not survival horror games. The only thing Resident Evil about them is what's written on the cover art. But of course, Resident Evil 4 Remake is something that we've all expected to come, and the way that I can sort of analyze this is they really have to change the level structure for these games a considerable bit. And let me explain. When I think of Resident Evil 4, I think of 3 sections, okay? 3 acts. The Village Act, Act 1. The Castle Act, which is sort of the main meat of the game, which is where most of your playtime is. And then the final, like, Island Act, where you go onto the military island and you fight off Salazar and whatnot. And before you're like, but Munya, what about spoilers? Bro, the game is as old as the fucking Paleolithic era, okay? I'm sorry if I'm spoiling Resident Evil 4, okay? Alright, it was gonna happen. You knew this. But of course, Resident Evil 4 has like got that 3-location structure. So the way that I see this really succeeding from a remake perspective is, sure, make the game creepy, make the game, you know, all there. You can have campiness and creepiness at the same time. Hell, even the original Resident Evil 4 had its moments. When the village went dark, the tone really did shift. But of course, in order to do it, you have to restructure all these locations so that there's more backtracking, maybe more puzzles, more interconnectedness, something that you see in Resident Evil 2 Remake, not so much 3 Remake, but that's because 3 Remake is more of a shooter and like a, you know, go from point A to point B to point C. They need to make it more interconnected for these locations. Same for the castle, which is going to be the most important section. They cannot fuck up the castle. And even for the island at the end, where it basically just becomes a straight up shooter, for crying out loud. But of course, I think they have to really focus on providing these 3 locations more interconnectedness. And also, if they're going for the creepy environments as well too, more tense encounters with things like the regenerators, for instance, right? One of the creepiest enemies in Resident Evil history. Look, it's going to be hard to fuck up Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 is such a good game that despite its polarizing nature, I would absolutely consider it to be my top 5 favorite games of all time. And I would want Resident Evil 4 Remake to be more puzzle-oriented, more survival horror than the original plan of the game was. Because to me, when I think of remakes, and I usually don't get excited about remakes because oftentimes they're just like the exact same game that you've played before. But in this case, we have Resident Evil 4, we can play the original, in all of its glory. But with the remake, we can finally get a fresh coat of paint and a better reimagining on what this game would have looked like had it had the initial scope of Resident Evil survival horror roots. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of it. Honestly, given the fact that it's coming out next year, I don't really foresee a delay simply due to the fact that the engine they're building on, they're really reusing a lot of things that allows them to pump out these games much more efficiently. So I don't see a delay. This is definitely looking like it's a March 2023 thing. And, I'm excited. Resident Evil 4 is one of the best games of all time. And, it's going to be really hard to mess that up. To be honest with you, I would be shocked if in some capacity this game was broken. All it needs is a restructuring of the original 3 locations, more focus on that survival horror element, but just enough so that they don't forget that it's still a goddamn action game. And hopefully, unlike the Resident Evil 3 remake, we really do need all that original content. That means the core campaign, Separate Ways, Assignment Ada, and the goddamn amazing Resident Evil 4 Mercenaries mode. Look, RE8 Village had a great Mercenaries, so hopefully the tradition continues. That said, though, I'm still hoping that at some point Capcom considers remaking Code Veronica, and please God, I'm asking you nicely, give us Outbreak File 3 for fuck's sake, or just remaster the original 2 and let me play them with my homies. That said, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.